Anytime the executive branch says, I'm not complying with a court order, or flirts with saying, I'm not complying with a court order, that puts us in a constitutional crisis.
Jeh Johnson, thank you so much for your time today. I am just honored and thrilled to be talking to you. You are the former DHS Secretary, former Chief Counsel for the Department of Defense. You know more about the workings of government than most living people. Thank you for being here today.
Jessica, thanks for having me.
I think there is so much to talk about that I want to have our conversation on super speed, but we don't actually have to do that. I just thought I'd ask just to start off because I live in daily shock at what I'm seeing happen on the streets of America with ICE, with federal agents, the way the president goes after news organizations. You just wrote with Judge Ludig a piece about the state of our democracy. I'll ask you specifically about it, but as a human being, what is your general day-to-day reaction when you see what's happening in America?
Shock at how so many democratic legal norms are being broken, just blown up on an almost daily basis. And I ask myself constantly, is this the new normal? Is this the forever spiral downward for our nation? Or is this temporary? And like so many other things in American politics, is it just a pendulum that has swung to an extreme and it will ultimately swing back again? Jessica, if you look at presidential history, just in the course of my lifetime, there is a pendulum effect to national American politics. You know, we elected John F. Kennedy after Dwight Eisenhower and Next Gen. We elected Nixon after LBJ. We elected Carter after Nixon Ford. He was Next Gen. We elected, of course, Barack Obama after 8 years of George W. Bush. And then we went to a real extreme by electing Donald Trump after Barack Obama. So I'm optimistic that the pendulum will swing back to something a little more normal than what we face right now, all the challenges we face right now.
I want to pause on something you said, which is that you believe we're in a constitutional crisis. What is your evidence of that?
Anytime the executive branch says, I'm not complying with a court order, or flirts with saying, I'm not complying with a court order, that puts us in a constitutional crisis. We no longer have three co-equal branches of government that include checks and balances, because the reality is the judiciary really does depend on the executive branch to enforce its court orders. The Federal Marshal Service is part of the executive branch of government, for example. And we depend on executive branch actors to comply with court orders. That has been fundamental to our constitutional order for the life of our nation.
And you're seeing them flout them now.
Well, yes, we're seeing the executive branch not take court orders seriously, half-heartedly comply. On occasion, President Trump says, yes, I always comply with court orders. But the mood in the executive branch is, it's not up to the judiciary to decide when to deploy the National Guard. Right. It's up to me, the president. I'm the commander in chief. I should decide. It's reminiscent of, if the president does it, it is not illegal, quoting Richard Nixon in that famous David Frost interview.
So I want to get back to some of the current political environment, but let me take advantage of the fact that you actually know the law. You ran DHS, and we are now seeing daily disturbing videos of ICE behavior on the streets. We're seeing ICE tackle people at work. We see them ripping children out of cars, off the street, grabbing moms out of carpool lines, often without identifying themselves, certainly without a warrant. And it's generally just because these people are black or brown. Speaker Johnson says he has not seen ICE cross the line. Have you?
Yes, I have. When I was Secretary of Homeland Security, and ICE is part of Homeland Security, what I continually told our people in ICE leadership, which included then Tom Homan, by the way, um, one combustible incident in a community could undermine your ability to carry out your mission in that community. We do need the cooperation of local law enforcement, city councils, mayors in red and blue cities to fulfill our mission to enforce the immigration laws. One incident, pulling a school child out of school, grabbing a grandmother off the church steps, can derail your ability to work in these communities. Unfortunately, now we're seeing that in spades. The message that seems to have flowed down to ICE agents, ERO agents on the streets is whatever it takes. And I have seen firsthand how an incident, a high profile arrest and detention of a sympathetic migrant can derail ERO's ability. ERO stands for Enforcement Removal Operations, which is part of ICE, can derail their ability to do their job in a particular community. And, the hard lesson I learned 3 years managing immigration enforcement in this country is that um, very often no news is good news. The best immigration policy may be one you never hear about in the news, where we're securing our border at the same time we are treating people who are already in this country in a fair and humane way. It has to be the case that two things could be true at once. And and,
Casey,
and I want to add to that, the mask images, videos of law enforcement agents in masks arresting someone, grabbing someone off the street, um, doesn't look like America to me. It looks like some other country. I live in northern New Jersey, right outside of New York City. The New York City Police Department is the largest, most powerful police department, excuse me, in the country. They walk the streets of New York City. They patrol New York City. They do not wear masks. They wear uniforms with nameplates. And I do not understand why ICERO feels compelled to hide their identities when police departments in some of the most dangerous communities in this country do not do that.
well, it certainly seems that they're changing the rules. They want to ignore local law enforcement and overcome that with overwhelming force of their own. And it sure seems they're intent on actually terrorizing communities. Trump has said that he would go after the quote worst of the worst. But the latest numbers show that 71% of the people who have been detained have no criminal record, and many of them have no removal order as well. There are even US citizens being detained, again, primarily because they are black or brown. As somebody who ran DHS, how would you defend that? Or can you?
I can't defend that. Um, your question suggests the answer. I can't defend that. And when this administration first came to office, we heard a lot of talk about mass deportations, but we also heard we're going after the worst of the worst. Good, you should. Every administration should have that as an objective. You have to have priorities in how you enforce the law, whether you're DHS, DOJ, or any other law enforcement agency. You have to have priorities. You have to prioritize the most significant public safety, national security threats. And that's what they started doing. And that's a good thing. Although they did that, they prioritized even that in some legally extraordinary ways. But you have to, I mean, by simply rounding up people en masse, you're actually sending people into hiding. You're making your own job harder. Uh, when I worked with Tom Homan, and I will say Tom was, when he worked in ICE as the number 2 in ERO, Enforcement and Removal Operations, he was one of my most dependable advisors on immigration enforcement policy. When I came to office at DHS in December 2013, I didn't know a whole lot about immigration. I had to learn. And so I surrounded myself with a group of people who had a real cross section of viewpoints, including Tom, who was very pro enforcement, and I knew that. But we'd sit down and I'd say, "All right, Tom, we have to have a concerted series of enforcement actions in this particular community to show that we are enforcing the law and sending people home." So you pull out the list of people who are undocumented. First, you have to eliminate those who do not have final orders of removal, who have appeals that are pending. Then you have to take off the list anybody who was ordered deported in absentia. And then, to be fair and humane, take off people who are minors, who are under the age of 18. And then, once you have that list winnowed down, you actually have to go find them. And that's not always easy because undocumented people in this country don't tend to hang around their last known address. So, and by embarking on this mass effort, you're sending people further into hiding, making it all the more problematic to go after the public safety threats, which is where our focus really should be.
But it sounds like Tom Homan knows the law and knows better then.
I believe he does, yes.
So who do you think is?
Let me take a step back if I could.
Please.
When I was in the chair as Secretary of DHS, I had basically 4 people who helped me, advised me on immigration enforcement and policy. One was Tom. The other one was Kevin McAleenan, who was the number 2 in CBP, Customs and Border Protection. And then I had 2 people, immigration advisors on the left. One used to work for Ted Kennedy. The other one used to work for Zoe Lofgren. I'm sure you're familiar with those 2
Yes.
individuals.
Democrats.
And so I'd look at all 4 of them and I'd say, all right, here's an issue. What do we do? And the 4 of them would give me a cross section of views. And out of that came healthy decision making. And more importantly, each felt like they had been heard. They didn't always agree with everything I decided, but they felt like they had been heard and they were prepared to support and implement what I decided. And on a contentious issue like immigration policy, you simply have to have that. If you have viewpoints that are all the same, that's where you make really dangerous, dumb mistakes in your policy making and decision making.
I wonder whether they view these as mistakes. Let me ask you about the actual.
Well, they're mistakes in the following way, Jessica. So, migrant shows up for his asylum hearing in court. ICRO grabs him literally in the hallway outside of the courtroom and puts him in expedited removal proceedings. It's a mistake in the sense that you have now told publicly every migrant who's going to show up in court, don't show up in court.
Right.
So it just making the job of the immigration apparatus all that much more difficult.
Right. Which is why their total numbers are actually comparatively low compared to what they had expected or promised. Can I ask you a couple of yes or no questions about warrants? I understand ICE needs a judge's warrant to enter a home. Do they need a warrant to detain someone on the street?
Not necessarily.
Can businesses legally refuse ICE entry?
Yes, unless there's some exigent circumstance.
Like there's a crime going on or somebody's run into there.
Right.
Okay. What's the difference? What's the difference between a court-issued warrant and one signed by ICE?
A big difference. An administrative warrant is basically, I'm authorizing myself to go do something. And so it doesn't have much legal impact. A judicial warrant does, obviously.
So if you're confronted with ICE at your front door, you want to see that it's signed by a judge, that warrant, not by ICE.
If ICE wants entry into my property, into my home, yes, you need a judicial warrant.
And we are seeing instances of ICE taking people.
And there's some exigent circumstance.
Right. How about going into your car? Just like a woman at line to pick up her child at pickup.
Jessica, you're testing me for my law school.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's
But
just
there are circumstances under which, because a car is a moving object, the circumstances are a little different.
generally speaking, what does it say to you that ICE is pushing the boundaries often without these masks, without identifying themselves, tackling people who are screaming, "I'm a citizen, let me show you my paperwork"? What does it tell you about how ICE is now operating, that they're using these tactics?
What it tells me is that it's a transparent effort to appeal to the base, but in terms of immigration policy and enforcement, there will be long-term negative effects on the ability of our government to enforce immigration law. If agents who have to work in these communities become pariahs in these communities, among the general population, among city councils, local governments, it makes it all that much harder for them to do their own jobs.
Yeah. I have one more on ICE, and then we'll broaden it out to democracy a little bit further. The Associated Press today, and you don't have to know this article in order to address this, they reported that ICE has been using something called wrap restraints. They're full body wraps meant to replace hog tying. And, there have been lawsuits linking them to suffocation and even alleging this is a form of torture. Families who have family members detained by ICE say that ICE is currently using them on people who are already handcuffed detainees. If you're familiar with this tactic, what is your reaction to the knowledge that what is your reaction to ICE using them, and who would authorize that?
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen a video of that. I've never heard of that.
Okay.
But I mean, my reaction is, hey, I live in an urban area. I live in northern New Jersey, right outside of New York City. There's crime in this area. I have not seen on the streets of New York, in a subway station in New York, or any place else for that matter, someone being detained to that extent. Nor have I seen such a thing or heard of such a thing on the battlefield. I was the senior legal officer of the Department of Defense for 4 years, and I don't believe I've seen such a thing occur, in a battle space, during a war.
Right. So if we don't need it in war, maybe we don't need it in a detention center.
Well, especially if what ICE is currently doing is going after migrants in general. A lot of these people are not dangerous. They came here because they were desperate for a better life, fleeing a burning building in Central or South America. And a lot of them are, except for the fact that they entered this country illegally, fundamentally honest, decent people who are just trying to survive and raise a family and feed a family.
On that note, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem has been staging law and order videos in cities like Chicago and Portland.
Yep.
As someone who held her job, I wonder if you would speak to Secretary Noem, and if you had the chance, what would you tell her about using DHS as a vehicle for political propaganda?
Well, she has the virtue of a simple message, that's for sure. Leave now. I've heard a lot of her radio spots, and seen some of her videos. Being responsible for the homeland security of this nation is much more complex and has far more dimensions than just sending on steroids the deterrent message. There's so many facets to to Homeland Security. Uh, I don't know. I have no sense of who she depends on for advice and guidance and wisdom in the job. I just know that if you're coming from being governor of South Dakota or even general counsel of the Department of Defense, you do need a lot of good advice around you because it is such a big job. It's not just immigration enforcement, it's aviation security, it's maritime security, it's border security, it's cyber security, it's the Secret Service, it's FEMA, and I have no sense for whether she has fully grasped all of those missions in the 9, 10 months she's been in office.
Hmm. Among the new
So
push,
that was a long way of saying I'm not sure what I would tell her if I had an opportunity to talk to her. She hasn't exactly reached out for my advice.
right, not shocking. Um, the Trump administration has labeled Antifa a terror group. You have said that they don't have the authority to do that, but they did it anyway. What are the real world risks for protesters now that that order is in place?
The real world risk is that, well, you're correct. I mean, naming Antifa a terrorist organization in an executive order has absolutely no legal effect. First of all, Antifa is not a defined, organized group of people with a command structure. It's more, it's more an idea, and a president can designate an organization a foreign terrorist organization that has legal consequences. In other words, you and I cannot have anything to do with something designated an FTO, a foreign terrorist organization. Naming a domestic cause or a domestic rallying point a terrorist organization has dangerous consequences in the sense that you've vilified and to some extent put an X on the back of anyone who dares claim to be part of Antifa. There are a lot of very deranged, dangerous people in this country who will take matters into their own hands thinking that what they are doing is good for America. And so I've said dozens of times now that overheated rhetoric uh, normalizes further overheated rhetoric, and for the dangerous few among us makes violence inevitable. And so by taking actions like calling Antifa a terrorist organization, I think it creates significant public safety risk.
That's interesting. So you really see it as the danger is that it incites violence potentially against them by other maybe citizens more than it increases the legal risk that protesters could be detained or targeted
No, it
by the
doesn't.
federal
It
troops.
doesn't. It doesn't. That doesn't. It doesn't move the legal needle at all. It doesn't. It doesn't entitle law enforcement to find probable cause to arrest somebody because they're wearing a T-shirt that says Antifa. No,
So it's a pose. It's politics.
it's politics of a certain form.
Wow. Okay. Um, different topic, and I want to come back at the end to your report and some of what you think marching orders you could give us. You worked at Paul Weiss, one of the firms that made a deal with the Trump administration to provide them free pro bono work, and you left soon after. Do you feel like deals like that undermine trust in our legal system?
So I do not comment publicly about
Okay.
Paul Weiss, my former law firm of off and on 40 years. Um, I, I, I'm sure you, in your research, you also discovered that I'm currently chairman of the board of trustees of Columbia,
Yes.
which was a settlement of a fundamentally different nature, in my view. Um, yeah, this the way President Trump came after the law firms puts us in fundamentally new territory, and I'm not even sure that he had heard of some of these firms. I don't think he knew the name Perkins Coie before he took office, for example, or Jenner and Block. I don't think he even, you mentioned the name of somebody, a lawyer who he may have seen on TV, who's a partner in that firm. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me sign here. Um, but it's not as if he came into office with that objective, which um, is to me one of the things that makes Trump 2 so fundamentally different from Trump 1. I'm convinced that Donald Trump did not expect to win the election in 2016. I suspect he was going to go back to reality TV or something after that and claim that he won when he really didn't. And so a lot of Trump 1 was sort of flailing around. He appointed people that I'm sure he was impressed wanted to work for him, like John Kelly and Jim Mattis and Dan Coates and Rex Tillerson, and then he systematically drove them out. This time around, though he disclaimed Project 2025, what is that? I never heard of that. This is very much Project 2025. And the people he is appointing to very, very important government positions are people that he knows will follow his orders without question. And that is, and a lot of these, they're not only enablers, but they're giving him additional ideas of things to do in pursuit of Project 2025.
Do you think you've written this report on the state of democracy? Do you think Project 2025 implemented is a threat to democracy or makes us undemocratic?
I believe that our democracy is strong enough, durable enough, or at least I hope is strong enough and durable enough to sustain extreme challenges, though it's very clearly being pressure tested right now, very clearly, without a doubt. One of the things that I think we all have to appreciate, which we didn't appreciate before, is for the life of our democracy up to the present, we have depended upon leaders, presidents, who observe and abide by not just their oath to support and defend the Constitution, but constitutional norms. So much of our constitutional order is gray. So, for example, the First Amendment embodies the principles of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of press, but it's only 42 words in a semicolon because people, leaders, those who take the oath understood that they're abiding not just by the Constitution, but constitutional norms and principles. If you have someone in office who does not respect those norms and principles, doesn't understand them, never took that history course in class, and doesn't respect it, our democracy, our Constitution is pressure tested. And I'm afraid that's the environment we're in right now.
I could talk to you all day. I'm going to let you go. I have one more question, which is at this time of pressure testing, when you say we're in a constitutional crisis, you've looked into the state of our democracy, what would you ask concerned citizens to do, people who want to take action to protect what we have? And what gives you hope?
First of all, vote, encourage others to vote, get involved, go to peaceful rallies and demonstrations, exercise your First Amendment rights, speak out, encourage others to do the same. One of the recommendations we make in our report is rededicate ourselves to civics education.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is, I believe, that someone who studies to become a naturalized citizen in this country knows more about the three branches of government than your average American does now. Mm-hmm. I've helped people prepare for the test, so I know that to be a fact. And I believe that the more people learn about their government, the less suspicious they are of it. People are inherently suspicious of power, things they don't understand. They think it's evil. They think it's loaded with conspiracy theorists and so forth. As part of this report, Judge Ludwig and I went on a listening tour nationwide. We were surprised that so many people are so worried about our democracy, but they tend to be older people, my age and up. I want to see a room full of 25-year-olds or people my kids' age as concerned about our democracy. And so that word has got to filter down, up, laterally, whatever. But the more people who participate in our democracy, the better off we will be.
All right. One thing that could give us some hope is when we see people working across party lines and traditional Democrats or conservatives or left leaning and right leaning coming together. You did that with Judge Ludig recently, issuing a really thorough analysis of where we are as a democracy. Would you tell us why you decided to do this and what is your hope this leads to?
So I did it because I was asked by the president of the American Bar Association. She and Judge Ludig came to me and asked if I would be essentially his partner in co-chairing this effort. He's one of my heroes. He, of course, testified in the January 6th hearings. He, of course, told the vice president the truth about what he could constitutionally do and not do in presiding over the Senate on January 6th. And we issued a report in September of this year. It was a 2-year effort. And we really did want to examine what underlies the current state of our American democracy. So often, when you delve into the current constitutional crisis, and I think that's where we are, you get caught up in the daily news cycle and try to respond almost on a daily or weekly basis. We tried very hard to stay away from that and assess why is it that the American people elected Donald Trump not once but twice. The second time around, we knew what we were getting, more or less. Why is it that the American voting population is so restless, so disenchanted, so upset with our national leadership that they turn to something so extreme and unorthodox? And we put forth a series of recommendations intended to address these long-term undercurrents. Part of it is the mood of the American electorate, and a big part of it is how politicians today pander to those extreme views.
Yeah.
And so, for example, we put forth a series of recommendations, including having ordinary apolitical citizens redraw legislative district lines every 10 years, open nonpartisan primaries so that the political center is heard in the primary season, and a host of other things, better cybersecurity around our election, improving the qualitatively press coverage around politics in the election. These are recommendations that we hope are as relevant a year from now, 2 years from now, as they are today.
Secretary Johnson, thank you so much for your time today, for the work you continue to do for this country, and you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks for having me.